Hello and welcome back to the Remake tutorials. In the last video, we learned how to make the page editable, and we're able to edit the user's data from the page just by adding a few simple attributes. I noticed a tiny bug here though. If you click on the exact text of the card, it'll be editable, but if you click over here, it won't be editable. So I want to fix that bug real quick before we move on to adding data. So here, you'll notice we have the card element, which is what we want to be clickable to edit data, but the editable attribute is on this paragraph tag, which is inside of the element and doesn't include this drag handle. So what I want to do is move this attribute onto a new line. I'm going to move all of this data as well as the editable attribute up here. And then I'm going to add a target attribute for the location key. And we're just going to say data L target equals card text. Okay, now that should work. That should move the editable area up to the entire card element. And it should store the data on there, which means that's the data that's going to be edited when we click this editable area. And it's going to look for the text and set the text on this element because that's where this location key is going to point. Okay, let's go back, refresh the page, and now if I click over here, it will still be editable even if I click the handle. Okay, perfect. So now let's move on to adding data. So we have a few add buttons. Let's look at where those are. So we have the add button that's at the bottom of each stack, right here, add card. We have the button at the top of the page for adding a stack, and that's for adding a new list to the page. And we have a button at the top of each stack with a plus in it for adding a new card. Okay, let's start with the top of the page. And here, we're going to add a new attribute called data I new. Now this is a new type of attribute. I should have mentioned this for editable too. I stands for input. So that means we're inputting data to the page, but this data is not going to be extracted or saved by Remake. Unless it's actually edited and affects the structure of the page, then those data O attributes will be extracted from those new elements and saved. Okay, so we're going to have data I new, and we're going to say stack, and we're going to save this, and we're going to refresh the page, and we're going to click add stack, and it's going to add a new stack. What? How did that happen? That was like pretty magical, right? So how did it know to be able to add a new stack here? So all we told it is that we wanted to add a new thing called a stack. And what Remake did is before, when you were using this for loop, it actually saved a reference to this inner template because it knew that this inner template you were referring to as a stack. And so it knows that when you click an element with data input new stack, then it's going to render this again, and it's going to add it to the closest element or the nearest element that is a list. And it finds that by looking for data O type equals list. Now you can customize this, of course. You can have it add it into a different element by adding some other syntax in this attribute. You can have it add the stack to the top of the element or the beginning of the element instead of to the end. But by default, it'll just get the named element of the closest list and add that. It'll render that inner template, all of this. It'll render all of that inner template and then add it to the closest element with the list. So by default, it actually works out of the box a lot of the time. Okay, so let's move on to the next button. So that's the plus button at the top. Let's make more room for attributes here. And we'll say data I new, and we'll say equals card. And then also at the bottom, we're going to say data I new equals card. Okay, now let's refresh the page. And now if I click this button, it's going to actually add a new item to the bottom. And if I click the bottom item, it's going to add a new item. Now, this doesn't have any default text on it, but we can fix that for the cards as well as for the lists. So for the stacks, what we want to do is have it have a default stack heading. So let's say we're going to use a handlebars helper that comes with Remake, but if you just download, if you look at the documentation for handlebars helpers, you'll also be able to see all the helpers you have built in. And we're going to say default, so that if this is present, it's going to use that. But if it's not, it's going to say new stack item. Okay, so now we'll save that, and we're also going to do this for cards just ahead of time. So for each card, we want it to have some default card text. So we'll say default card text, and we'll say new card item. Okay, we'll save that, refresh the page. And now if we add a new card, we have new card item. If we add a new stack, it's going to add a new stack item. And there's not going to be any cards in there by default, but we can just very easily add new cards in there. Okay, perfect. There are other ways of doing this, of adding new items with actually partials. So there's a folder in here, in the app folder, that you can create called partials. And if you include files in there, they will actually also respond to the data INew attribute, and you'll be able to render new items from the partials directory. The other nice thing about adding files inside of the partials is that it will let you reuse those templates over and over again throughout your application. So right now we have everything in one file inside of here. So we have all the cards looping through in this for loop, and we have all the stacks looping through in this for loop. If we wanted to use a stack in a different template, what we'd want to do is get this inner template and split it out into a partials file and put it in there so that we can include it in other pages. But you can look into that documentation separately. Let's move on to the next step, and that's going to be making the items on this page sortable. Okay, see you there. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.